Hey. Hi everyone. For those who know me, you know that I like to start things on time. So it is 4 o'clock. So thank you so much for coming here today. My name is Felix Rivera. I serve on the Anchorage Assembly representing Midtown, so a little bit south of here. And I first got elected in 2017 and will be finishing up my service on the Assembly in April of next year. We have term limits on the Assembly, so which is a very positive thing. My counterpart in a lot of this, you'll see his name on the slide here, Assemblymember Salt, is unfortunately unavailable to be here. He's traveling right now, has family priorities that he's dealing with. Also, I had some technical issues with this projector, so hopefully everyone can see that screen fairly well. All right, so just brief on the agenda for today. First, I do want to thank everyone for coming on such a beautiful day today. I know there's probably a bunch of other things that you'd rather be doing with your time, so I appreciate it. So on the agenda for today, there's going to be a presentation, and I'm going to try to go through it relatively quickly. Then we're going to have time for Q&A, approximately 3 minutes per person, and then some closing comments. As folks probably saw at the table out in front, there are a variety of documents. There is a FAQ, frequently asked questions, one-pager, public hearing information, so for folks who are interested in participating in the final round of the public testimony for AO 2024-105SA. There's a little quarter sheet for folks interested in that. There's some copies of the ordinance for anyone that's interested in reading through that. We are going to spend a little bit of time in my presentation today just walking through the sections. And then at the end, after the presentation and Q&A, there's going to be a feedback form to share with folks, so I encourage you to do that before you all leave. All right, so without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so just a little bit on sort of the background of Project Anchorage and some of the story of Project Anchorage from a variety of different perspectives. So first is the Project Anchorage really started at the sort of inception around Project Anchorage, really started around 2018 or so when there was a cohort from the Rasmussen Foundation, from the Mayor's Office, from the Assembly, and others who went to visit Oklahoma City to just get a feel for what was going on there, because by and large, Oklahoma City was known to be a pretty hopping place. That cohort, a different version of that cohort, went back in 2022, and then that 2022 visit inspired a lot of action from the Anchorage Economic Development Corporation and a business-led coalition to bring forward what we now know today as Project Anchorage. I'll just read a little bit from a report that the AEDC Ad Hoc Sales Tax Committee put out as a sort of justification for moving forward with Project Anchorage. And this is specific to Oklahoma City, why Oklahoma City was the comparison, because a lot of folks are curious about that. So I'll just read from it. As a comparative for the deliberations of the Ad Hoc Committee and the limited timeline for those deliberations, Oklahoma City was identified as the best community to evaluate in their efforts to revitalize a city that nearly failed in the early 1990s. OKC is now a city often noted as an amazing success story of community reinvestment and revitalization that has resulted in OKC now recognized as a thriving and growing community that it's attracting and retaining working-age adults in significant numbers, the key goal of the EDC. OKC has done this by adopting a metropolitan area projects, MAPS, initiative that uses 1 cent dedicated sales tax used for the construction of a wide range of community improvement projects, all focused on improving the overall quality of the place in the community. Fast forwarding to the important stuff. Oklahoma City has several characteristics in common with Anchorage that include a significant past and current economic relationship with the oil and gas industry, a conservative population politically, and is a key regional logistics and services hub. These economic, social, and political elements make OKC a readily available and approachable example for consideration as a comparative for the committee. So that was just reading from some of that report that came out, because folks often want to know why OKC. Okay, so that's the story of the coalition. The story of a few other members. So I have been working by and large with Randy Stoltz, but in the beginning there was a third assembly member who was working with us on this, assembly member from Chuyakigo River, Scott Myers. And Scott's particular interest was in property tax relief. Randy's particular interest was in MAPS, municipal area projects. A little bit about my particular interests. So back when I ran for the third and final term in 2023, there was a lot of discussion around a sales tax in that campaign. Whenever I would talk to voters, it would be brought up. Whenever I would go to different forums, it was brought up. It was something that just you couldn't escape as a candidate. Everyone wanted to know what you thought about a sales tax. In a way that in all of my prior campaigns, that wasn't a central topic. So that inspired me to explore the idea a little bit more. And I brought to the prior administration the idea of a 2% sales tax, 1% to go towards property tax relief, and otherwise known as offsetting property taxes, and 1% to go towards municipal services. And by and large, I was thinking things like public transportation and housing, some of the really big areas that I was particularly passionate about, and felt like we needed to make some investments in those areas. Well, the prior administration really had no interest in anything that wasn't 100% property tax relief. No surprise if you know the prior administration. So that brought me into the fold with Project Anchorage, because I was looking to see, well, who else is having this conversation in the community? And I was directed to a EDC at the time. Bigger picture, and then we'll get into a lot of the specifics, I promise. Just this, I think it's important to really lay out the bigger picture in some detail. Bigger picture, there has been a significant amount, in my opinion, of stagnation in our city, malaise. I was actually talking to someone the other day that they were talking about sort of the loss of hope. And I think there are different ways to tackle those issues. Not all of those ways are necessarily directly related to municipal services. So as we look, and you guys have probably seen the communications I've put out, as we look at what are some of the levers we can pull, a sales tax is one of those levers that we can pull. And by and large, what I'm interested in as a policymaker is what we can do to control our own destiny by investing in ourselves and investing in our quality of life. And in order for any of that to happen, something has to get approved by the voters. There's nothing that we can do that is particularly significant that does not need to get approved by the voters. And I think we all know that there has been a string of dead sales tax proposals in the past. They're littering our history, dead proposal after another. So this proposal was put forward in a way that everyone got something that they wanted. And everyone is also probably not happy about something in the proposal. It also was put forward in a way that has the best chance of success, more than any proposal that I have seen in the past. Okay, get off my soapbox, onto the actual stuff. So, community engagement process by the Project Anchorage Coalition. So the coalition, the business-led coalitions, kicked off the community process, and then it went over to the assembly. So they started basically like spring and summer was the timeline that the business coalition had. And they conducted a public opinion research to just see the types of things that Anchorage voters are interested in through a sales tax. Then they conducted a 3-month-long public conversation centered around projects, and they had a survey out there, and they engaged with a whole lot of different groups, and in the end, collected 300 plus different project ideas from Anchorage residents. Some of these projects were just by in your neighbor. Some of these projects were by organized groups, but overall, there's 300 plus project ideas. Then after all of that work, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the project work in a bit, but then the assembly began its process. And so we had a fairly lengthy process beginning in August when we had our first work session to talk about the high level, sort of what is Project Anchorage, what does that mean, what will it do for our city, and then started digging into some of the nitty gritty once we actually had a draft ordinance for us to review. The ordinance was formally introduced, so out in the public for everyone to see in a comprehensive and very legalistic and bureaucratically written way in October of last year. So October 22nd is when it officially went onto the record. And then there were a variety of conversations that were held with the Alaska Black Caucus. They invited us to come in and have various community conversations because the Alaska Black Caucus is and continues to be very interested in this topic. In November of last year was when we had our first public hearing, and then we had another work session just to talk about the project selection and what did that look like, what were the projects that came out of that. In December of last year, we had another work session to talk about different versions people were thinking about putting forward, different amendments people were thinking about putting forward, and we also had a work session with community groups. They requested a work session with the Assembly to discuss their concerns and present recommendations to us. In the end, there were 5 different versions of the sales tax that were introduced. Most of those versions were really conversation pieces. And the sponsors will tell you this on the record, and they already stated it on the record if you want to go look at it, that those were conversation pieces to influence the trajectory of what a sales tax might look like. And then we took our holiday break. After our holiday break, we come back and we have a second public hearing. And there's a special committee that's formed to try to negotiate differences between what most Assembly members think of as the 2 proposals that probably have the most clout and the most ability to get approved. And so those were the S and the S2A versions. So that special committee only met once, but I think there were some really good discussions that were had in that particular committee. In February, so last month, there was a final draft version released, the SA version, and that's the version that everyone has in their hands right now. And if you don't, if you're interested in it, there's copies at the table in the back. We had a final work session with the Assembly to review the SA version, talk about any other possible amendments that folks may have, any other versions that folks may have, and talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. And then we had a final engagement with the Alaska Black Caucus. They invited both Assemblymember Daniel Voland and I to engage in a community conversation with them on Project Anchorage. Earlier this week, there was a third public hearing on Project Anchorage, and that pretty much takes us to where we are to date. This last point on here, just briefly, Assembly sponsors, and primarily it's Randy and I, and perhaps other Assembly members have had these meetings, but Randy and I have been approached by a lot of different organizations and a lot of different community groups to have private meetings to discuss and address their concerns. And by and large, a lot of their concerns have been addressed through the ordinance, but just to put that out there, that there's been a lot of the public discourse and then there's been a lot of private discourse as well to do our best to hear from the community. Okay, so a little bit on the project recommendation process. So as I said earlier, there were 300 plus submissions. There were a couple of different committees that the Project Anchorage Coalition formed to try to review the project submissions. So the Project Organization Committee to look at feasibility, geographic equity, and community impact. And the Costing Committee, which really looked a little bit later in the process of what will the costing of these different projects look like, because we know we have a specific bucket. Specifically, we're looking at $60 million as the bucket for the municipal area projects. And so what kind of projects can we realistically do with those $60 million? And so in the end, given all those considerations, they recommended a final list, slate of projects to go in the ordinance to the Assembly. There was, just to get a pulse of voter support, there was a public opinion survey that was done on, so there was a 300, then it was narrowed down to some smaller number. The smaller number was sent to the voters, and then was narrowed down to 10 projects from there. Because in the end, as I said, this needs to go to the voters to approve, and so we wanted to get a sense of what voters are interested in. So this is the final project list that is in the SA version. It has a variety of different types of projects on the list, and I'm realizing now that might be fairly small for folks looking at that screen. So I'll just read the titles. So there's the Kincaid Trailside Facility, Goose Lake Trailside Facility. I'm going to skip number 3, talk about that in a minute. The Anchorage Children's Museum, the Downtown Arts and Entertainment Redevelopment, primarily focused on the PAC. East Anchorage Sports Center, the Chester Creek Sports Complex Development. There's a part of that I'll talk about in a minute. The Eagle River Sports Center, the Girdwood Arts and Recreation District, and then this last project. So the projects in the red, what are those? Those are changes that have been made from the original version and even the S version to this final SA version. So that includes the development of Tract B Cook Subdivision, which is the very legalistic name for what's formerly known as the National Archives site. And so I think for folks who maybe have seen it in the media, the National Archives site is a pretty big piece of land in Midtown that is ripe for development, and in fact likely will be, there will likely be an RFP, or request for proposal, put out in the coming months, if not weeks, that will try to solicit bids from developers who are interested in developing that parcel of land. And part of the reason that we put this one in here as a new project was a lot of the public testimony we heard and a lot of the interest we heard from our colleagues on the Assembly was an interest in focusing on housing, as much as we possibly can, focusing in on housing. So that was one of the projects there that will likely be able to develop a substantial amount of housing in Midtown. And then the Chester Creek Sports Complex redevelopment. There has been a proposal put out there by a community organization, community group, on this redevelopment, and we decided to include, just like that community group had, this nexus and focus on housing. And so that's a new addition to the proposal that didn't exist. And then the next part was really listening to a lot of folks who testified and spoke to prior Project 80's infrastructure that is great, still in use, but needs some love. So what can we do to not only focus on some future quality of life projects, but also look at investing in prior projects that have existed for decades and have greatly benefited our quality of life. So that's where number 10 comes from. And that's really focusing on facilities that are open to the general public that residents can access or use. And in specific, we put in there a pretty big chunk. So 15% of the net proceeds of the 1% for maps could be used for the repair and improvement of existing facilities. So we wanted to really put a big chunk of our resources, of that $60 million, 15% of that, into these existing facilities. All right, so now getting into the nitty-gritty of the ordinance. So the ordinance is, well, I'll just get into it and then I'll explain it starting on section 3. So section 1, and I'm just going to go section by section. Section 1 states that the language in section 2 is going to be placed on the special election ballot of September 2nd, 2025. And I'll talk a little bit about that special election ballot here in a minute. So this is basically saying that section 2 is what you're going to see on the ballot. Pretty easy. Section 2 is that ballot proposition language. So it's a broad explanation of the proposal, charter changes, language to implement Project Anchorage, and amendments to the Bill of Rights in our charter. So that is what you will see on the ballot. It's a few pages long, if I recall. The bulk of the ordinance that you all have before you is section 3, and that is the really first take at implementation of Project Anchorage in our municipal code. Because whenever you do these types of complex tax measures, and it's for every tax measure we've ever done, it's always been the same, whether it's the marijuana tax, the alcohol tax. There is a part 1 implementation where you send something to the voters, likely requires a charter change, likely you develop a road map and you put that in municipal code. And that is what section 3 is, which is that sort of initial roadmap of what it would look like to possibly implement Project Anchorage. So what does some of this stuff talk about? 12.80.060, I'm not going to go through everything because a lot of this is super technical, the kind of stuff that the accountants and the lawyers and all that jazz wrote and using for their internal purposes. But 12.80.060, the Maps Oversight Board, they are meant to do a lot of the detail-oriented work to make recommendations on moving the projects forward and adding new projects. So right now, the projects that are in the proposition that will be sent to the voters, they're not ranked in any particular order, just 1 through 10 unranked in priority order. And that's largely because the work to do the ranking is going to happen after the voters either approve or don't approve, and will rely on a lot of further costing and estimating and design work to determine which projects are ready to move forward now, which projects maybe need a little bit more process before they can move forward. So that's what the Maps Oversight Board is going to do. There's also the ability for the Maps Oversight Board, if there is extra money in that $60 million bucket, for them to possibly add new projects and send those new projects to the voters. In the end, that's the voters that get to decide on any new possible projects. It's not just this board or the assembly that gets to decide on that. Then 12.80.070 talks about a variety of exemptions, and I won't read them, but you can see on the screen there a variety of different exemptions. There was an analysis that was done, and if you're interested in reading the analysis, it is on the Assembly website, from UAA, Center for Economic Development, that looked at this proposal, the essay version, and looked at its regressivity. And in essence, what the UAA Center for Economic Development analysis did is it looked at the top 10% of households by income and the bottom 10% of households by income. And it looked at all of the exemptions, what exempts, what's not exempt, and based off of sort of average annual expenditures, how much property tax would those two groups be paying as a percentage of their overall, or be exempt from, I should say, as a percentage of their overall annual spending. So what they determined was that for the bottom 10% of households by income, approximately 60% of those households' annual income would be exempt, so according to the SA version that we have on the table right now. So 60% would be exempt from the sales tax of their annual spending. And then in the top 10% of households by income, that number goes down to 38% of their annual spending would be exempt by the exemptions. And then everything sort of ratcheted in between, right? Section 3 also adds the ability for us to modify exemptions. So we are pretty much going to be done with this proposal by March 18th. So let's say come March 18th, the Assembly does decide to send this to the voters, and there are other possible exemptions that we want to look at to add. This allows us to continue to add or modify those exemptions. Certainly we want to try to add as many exemptions on the front end as possible, but likelihood of us capturing every little thing is, no matter how long the process is I would say nigh impossible. So this gives us that flexibility to do that additional work. Then there is also a household exemption, which is currently set to exempt folks at 80% of federal poverty level, but that is also going to be in the ordinance language. So this allows folks, this allows the Assembly and future assemblies to look at changing that number. If 80% of FPL is not the right number as we go through the process, then it allows us to change that to a more appropriate level. And then 12.80.100 looks at the Alaska Remote Sellers Sales Tax Code, which just essentially allows us to tax online purchases, which was something that was important for me and important for other members to make sure that we are capturing that ever-growing chunk of our economy. Section 4 is all about the protection of the tax cap to make sure that as we're implementing this new, pretty robust tax, or possibly implementing it, that we are protecting our current financial infrastructure, which is our tax cap. Section 5 is an increase to the business personal property tax to really provide assistance mainly to small and medium-sized businesses, but everyone will be able to benefit from it. So the current business personal property tax is set at $20,000, and this would look at increasing that to, I believe, $250,000. Section 6 essentially says that the full text of sections 2, 3, and 5, which are mainly the sections which deal with the ballot proposition language and the implementation language, those will be published on both the elections website and be physically available, so physical copies at all accessible voting centers and at the election center, so that folks who are interested in going through all of that can do so. Then section 7, it sets, so one of the things that was a big change from a lot of the earlier versions was that alcohol and marijuana purchases were not exempt from a lot of the earlier versions. This new version compromises understanding the will of several of my colleagues and of the industry groups to exempt them. This section 7 sets policy intent of the current assembly that if this proposal gets to the voters and if it gets approved, then alcohol and marijuana will be exempt for the duration of this proposal, which right now we're looking at 7 years, right? 7 years time limited tax. Then if a future assembly decides, you know what, Project Anchorage did what it was supposed to do, and we should put a second version of it before the voters, then at that point, alcohol and marijuana shall be included. So we're no longer going to look at exempting those two particular industries. It's non-binding to any future assembly, but it is some intent that we wanted to put a very strong, emphasized pin in it for now. Section 8 sets a special municipal election to be held on September 2nd, 2025, really in accordance with policy that was set by AR, an ordinance that we approved in January. And that ordinance basically says, hey, the Assembly should set this question to a special election between August 1st and November 30th, 2025. And so that's how the September 2nd, 2025 date came to be. I will say that this date is one that can also be amended if so needed or desired, but that is a starting point to the conversation. And then section 9 says that if this gets approved by the voters, then all of those previous sections in charter and in code will formally become adopted on October 1st, 2025. Okay, so assembly process from here. So we had our first town hall earlier on Wednesday at the Lusek Library, and it was a good convening around the same number of folks as here. And then right now we're having our second town hall. Thanks for being here. On March 14th, so that's next Friday, is when I expect publication of the amendment packet. That packet will be publicized and published at muni.org/Project Anchorage. And then I'm expecting, just sticking on this point for a little bit, I'm expecting there to be at least a few different amendments from Randy and I that we had planned prior to the town halls, and then we're also looking at some possible amendments post-town halls, just based on the feedback that we got. But the ones that we had been looking at prior to the town halls were one amendment to change the overall configuration from a 1/3, 2/3, 1/3 to maps, 2/3 to 1% to maps, 2% to property tax relief for the full 3%, changing that to a 50-50, so it would be 1.5% to property tax relief and 1.5% to maps. So that is an amendment that's going to be put forward. The second amendment is that's going to be put forward is dealing with some suggestions by Foraker regarding some nonprofit concerns, which we've been working with them. We've already adopted several of their amendments, so I don't see this being a big hurdle. And then third is softening some of that language in section 7, which I talked about. And this was just done at the request of some of the industry folks, just to make it perfectly blunt and obvious that this is policy intent for the current assembly, and it's not something that is binding to future assemblies. And then as I understand it, there are maybe a few amendments that Assembly members Zolotel and Brawley are considering putting forward. And so all of those possible amendments will be finalized and published next Friday, with a final public hearing, debate, and vote set for the meeting of March 18th, which is a couple Tuesdays from now. So some opportunities to weigh in. If folks didn't get it, there's a little quarter sheet that talks about opportunities to weigh in at the front table. But between now and the moment we vote, always encourage folks to email the assembly. I know I am not the only assembly member that looks at my emails during assembly meetings, and so that assembly on the page there is the one to go to all assembly members, so assembly@anchorage.gov. Then if you're interested in testifying over the phone, then you have to sign up by 5 p.m. on Monday, March 17th at anchgov.info/testify. On the printed sheets, there's a slightly different URL. Both of them will get you to the same place, essentially. Then in person, if you're interested in testifying in person on the 18th, then you can come to the Assembly Chambers at the Lusek Library. I would get there by 6 p.m. 6 p.m. is the earliest that we can take any public, that we can open any public hearing. and it's a first come, first serve. So you don't have to sign up on any list or anything. You can just come in at 6 o'clock, wait for us to open the public hearing, and then the chair will let you know. You can line up in the middle aisle to testify. Okay, I think that is it for this. Now let me see, make sure I can make this work. Okay, perfect, it's working. All right, so just a quick reminder before we open it up, and just turn this on. Okay. All right, so just a quick reminder, 3 minutes per person. I'll sort of give you the courtesy to finish off your comments, 5 to 10 seconds, but please do finish your thoughts once your time is run out, or you don't have to use all the time. You can ask questions if you want, and I will do my best, being the only one here, to respond to your questions. But certainly I will be taking copious notes as folks speak, so if I'm not looking at you while you're testifying, that's what I'm doing, is taking notes. Or you don't have to ask questions, you can just testify, and that's also perfectly acceptable. All right, with that, feel free to comment up, folks.
A quick question, does that be related to the property sales?
So this is a town hall for the Project Anchorage proposed sales tax, but if you want to testify or speak on any issue or topic, more than happy to hear from you.
I'll be happy to start. I'm Steve McKeever. I'm a resident, property owner, house owner in Rogers Park. I'm sorry I missed the start of the meeting, so maybe things have changed a little bit, but I'm opposed to the Project Anchorage proposal. I think the sales tax is enacted. I think it'll be, no matter what things are accepted from the sales tax, I think it will still remain regressive. The idea of cutting property taxes for those who do own property it won't be passed on to the people that are the renters, if they're landlords that are renting, that have property tax and their property tax is reduced. I don't see those landlords passing the savings on to the people that are renting the property, because their property is going to be done by market forces, and they're just going to pocket the difference if we're going to pocket it. My other concern is that the Project Anchorage that I've heard about is the sales tax is enforced for 2 or 3 years or something, and then goes away. But we've got all these brand new projects in town, but how do we support those projects? How are you going to maintain those projects? Are you going to raise the property taxes back again? And I think that there's a concern about you're going to have to hire 15 or 20 people to manage this whole sales tax thing. What happens to them if it reverts back to the sales tax goes away? They all just lose their jobs again. So it seems to be a bureaucracy that we're not needed. So again, I'm not in support of the Project Anchorage. The other concern with my bit of remaining time is that the projects that I've heard, I haven't seen a full list of the project nor reviewed one, but they seem to be directed at the people in Anchorage with the highest income. I don't see any projects on the list that are directed towards those that perhaps live in the lower income parts of town. A ski center, oh great, but how many people are cross-country skiers in town? I'm a cross-country skier. It'd be nice to have a facility, but is it going to serve the people of Anchorage, the proportion of people in Anchorage? I don't think so. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Thanks for having the town hall and listening to what we have to say.
Now I have random comments. In terms of the tax, one of the points of the Project Anchorage was to reduce property tax, even though I think at this point 2% are supposed to go towards that. The 1% are still an increase that we didn't pay before. There's also 11 propositions on the ballot that is coming up in April 1st. All of them, if they're voted in, are question is how much relief are you really getting? And the other thing is, once the sales tax is in place, the assembly can change which buckets it goes to. And they don't need to put it on the ballot to do that. So technically, once the sales tax is in place, a week later they can go and say, oh, we're not gonna give you 2% as property tax relief. We're only gonna give you 0.5% or none at all. So that, I have a real problem with that. I also have a problem with the fact that it's supposed to be temporary once the sales tax is in place. From my experience watching the assembly and government, nothing is ever temporary, so I have concern there. In regards to the projects, none of the projects are inherently bad. There are decent projects, but I think the timing is really bad. During COVID, when CARES Act money was allocated, there were $2 million that were allocated for grocery assistance, and the city ran out. And it was up to $200 per family, not necessarily 200, and yet $1.5 million were allocated to a public lands job program to hire individuals to help improve or expand soft surface trails and other shovel-ready projects in Girdwood and Eagle River, and to help with the installation of an indigenous wayfinding project. Again, there's nothing wrong with the project itself, but at a time when people struggle to put food on the table, I think it is a misuse of money to work on these projects rather than help people feed their families. And then lastly, you're proposing a special election in 2020 when the mayor had to step down and Austin Quinn Davidson was the appointed mayor. You refused us a special election because one of the reasons was it was too expensive. So you refused a special election for the voice of the people, but you want to fund a special election for a project that gives you more taxes, and I have a real problem with that. So I will be a no on the sales tax in the project Anchorage. Thank you.
Who else wants to come up and speak?
Hello. I have a lot of questions, so I'm going to go as quick as I can. My name is Christopher Lynch. I'm a trained economist. I have my undergraduate in it. I'm working on my master's. I reviewed Oklahoma City's MAPS program, so I'm not coming from a place of ignorance. My first question is that the Oklahoma City MAPS program had a 1% sales tax that was dedicated to public projects, while this proposal is a 3% sales tax with 2/3 of it going to property tax relief. Why would you expect the same success when our plan prioritizes property tax relief over public improvements? Do you want to answer, or should I move on?
I'm happy to answer later, but go ahead.
Okay, my second question is, how do you justify imposing a tax on the homeless who are our citizens when the revenue was planned to go to 10 projects that they will not benefit from? Third, past tax initiatives like marijuana taxes were promised to solve some economic issues and to, for example, homelessness, maybe not solve, but improve. What evidence do you have that this sales and property tax reduction will generate those promised benefits? Next, Oklahoma City gained public trust through years of MAPS projects with clear, visible results. 1%, not 3%. We do not have the same history of tax management, to say the least. Why should the public trust that this sales tax is not just shifting wealth from working citizens to property owners? The sales tax proposal includes a $2,500 cap on the taxable amount of sale, meaning only the first $2,500 of a large purchase would be taxed. How do you justify this other than by further taxing the working class who is less likely to make large purchases? And lastly, although I like many of the existing exemptions, providing exemptions for fuel seems counterproductive to encouraging the use of environmentally friendly transportation, including the people mover, which is suffering due to a lack of use. How do you justify this? I talked a little too fast, but that's all I have.
Thanks.
Adrian, can you know a homeowner here on the east side? I have some gaps in my knowledge, and one of the things I wanted to learn today was why are all the projects, capital projects, why are they not going to existing services that we know enhance quality of life and we know we need to improve the sustainability of them? Thank you.
Hello, I'm Mara Hannah, and I own property in the UMed district. I have concerns, as the same as these people, that the property tax will impact the poor more greatly than anybody else. And you've made concessions saying, well, we will exempt the lower income people who are 80% of the poverty level. Well, how are the stores and stuff supposed to know that they are exempt? How is that process going to work? Are they going to carry around a poor card, or how is that process going to work? Another thing is, once you have a list of projects, how are those projects going to be chosen? I've seen a committee, and who appoints that committee, and how is that going to be chosen? Or could there be voter approval of each project? I have never seen any numbers about specifics on how much this is going to cost. The people are going to have to hire, the infrastructure that is going to take to do all this. You're going to need a bunch of digital infrastructure. And last but not least, I think the quality of life improvements are, like the lady said before, are mostly recreation and parks improvements. I believe the services that we need more police, more fire, more our roads plowed, all that kind of stuff would be a much better use of this tax if it goes through. Thank you.
I just have one question. Why do we, in the same breath, acknowledge that there is a problem of homelessness and being able to afford food, and in that same breath, we want to tax the same people that we acknowledge are having hardships? Thank you.
Lifelong Alaskan. I wasn't too sure I was really what's on the ballot exactly, first meeting like this, but to hear that.
Come closer to the microphone.
Yes.
Yep, please speak up.
To hear that you would like to impose a tax on the homeless, it reminds me of something I heard in college. The system is designed to work for those it's designed for. I feel that that is really, really cold-hearted and disheartening to hear that people freezing to death and who can not find adequate food sources. I myself am a student. I have 2 small children, one who's autistic. I'm on a fixed income, and to tax food would leave us without food sometimes.
Phil Cannon, President of the Accountants for the Mountain View Community Council. And I have already publicly testified twice at the Assembly that I'm very opposed to this sales taxes are regressive, but this sales tax is especially regressive and especially unfair to those who are of the lowest income. And I do think it's humiliating to have to identify yourself as poor to get exemptions. The first 38 minutes we were here felt like a commercial to me. My understanding, I'm glad that it finally did turn to a listening kind of thing, but I've noticed that, I don't know, I'm not sure that it's appropriate to go, it's one thing to inform, it's another thing to advocate, and I think it's flirting maybe with that. I think when it comes to special elections, we have lower voter turnout in general, and in our communities that are going to be most hurt by sales tax, we already have low turnout. And so there were questions even already asked. I think you will answer some of them after question time, but about why this timing, this feels like bad timing. My impression has been there are certain people on the assembly who want to push this through before they cycle off the assembly and want to say, look what I did. That doesn't feel like a good process. That feels like pushing things through. And special elections cost money. That was already mentioned. The ranking of what gets worked on after the tax gets approved feels suspicious at the very least. And I think that the 60%, 38% comparison about how much income would be taxed per bit, like 60% of very little will hurt. You know, or 40% of very little rather will really hurt. Whereas 70% of a lot may not even be felt. And so I'd be curious to find out what those percentages look like when you're not just looking at the top 10% and the bottom 10%, but when you start to look at things closer to the median. And then I just think last minute, the promise of last minute amendments, just going like, hey, we're going to announce by Friday what it'll actually look like, and then you have less than 2 weeks to digest that, to inform the public, and then to have one assembly meeting with the opportunity to testify. It feels rushed, it feels unfair, it feels like it is being pushed rather than being, well, and nobody so far has testified in favor of it. So I don't think that there is a sense in which this is really coming from the community. I know you say 300 residents, but I think those were 300 resident business owners who, I mean, 300 is 0.1% of the city. That is not representative, and that's not a fair group of people to come up with what the right projects should be. I see I'm out of time.
Thank you.
All right, Jamie Lucas, Anchorage, fabulous. So yeah, I testified on this one time previously as well. Not exactly sure what more I can add to that's already been said in the room, but obviously, sales tax is highly regressive. You have one of the highest costs of living in the state of Alaska. It's like the third highest in the nation behind New York and California. And so when a woman was giving testimony previously during the assembly, she mentioned, you know, there was a sales tax that was implemented in Oklahoma. Oklahoma has the third lowest tax rate in the United States. And so obviously, you have people that typically go from high cost of living areas to low cost of living. And so it may work there because they're generating some income, but the cost of living is so low that people are going to go there regardless. So the main issue is you're trying to encourage people to come to the state of Alaska. That is difficult. Then you have people that are already here that may decide they just want to go out to the valley. You know, they've been whether the property taxes go up or something else. The businesses leave. Typically, what ends up happening is the jobs leave, and then people follow, and then you run into a cycle, a cascade, similar to what happened in Detroit over a 40, 50-year period, where the people that could leave left, and then what you had was the people that could not. They were still there. Property taxes go up, and then people have foreclosures. They lose their houses, and from there, then you have, you know, a large area which you have to, you know, provide services to, whether it's, you know, buses, transit, wastewater, garbage pickup, but then your tax base leaves, and then, you know, it just becomes a wasteland. And so, with that said, not a lot that I can add to this other than to say, you know, a business owner said to me, and I agree with him, this isn't about a 3% sales tax and a sunset. It's about getting something past the finish line, getting infrastructure in place, and then raising it, because obviously the city is in a situation where it needs a certain amount of revenue to meet its operating expenses, and also you're trying to increase incentives to pay pensions, and so it's a difficult decision all around of where you're going to get the money from. But the sales tax is probably not the best way to go because it's highly progressive. So thank you very much.
proposed sales tax. And I just, first of all, I've shared already about this whole process, about how this came into being and how it was unfair out the gate. We have already heard over and over regressive, it's regressive, but again, it's the process, the projects that were chosen, who chose the projects. It's typical. And so I just, I appreciate you again being out here. I hope that we can squash this even before it goes to the ballot for, I don't want to see our money being spent on a special election. I mean, it's just ludicrous, but I just want to get on record. I want to see for myself if the individuals here that are opposed to the proposed sales tax could just raise their hand and we can snap a picture so that we can have it in our records. If you are against the sales tax, please raise your hand. You don't have to be fearful. Thank you.
I'm Kirk Rose, thank you. I think that one of the things that can get overlooked is the data, and a lot of it is in. And what this tax costs a family of four in this community is anywhere between $800 to $1,000. And what that money does in this community for a family here, let's just make a comparison between a family here and a family that owns property in Girdwood. What that money does for a family here is it is exported to out-of-state landlords, some of the deepest commercial pockets and property owners in the city. And it pays for projects that I've never heard anyone say that they want. I've been coming to this community council for nearly 15 years, and I've never heard anyone ever describe an East Side sports complex.
Right.
What I have heard them talk a heck of a lot about is the Mountain View Community Center right over there. I don't know who came up with an East Side sports complex. Maybe it's a nice idea, but this community has never once talked about it in the 15 years I've been coming here. Now, alternatively, if you're in Girdwood and you own $1 million home, you're seeing a massive tax refund come back to you. Your money's not being redistributed or exported somewhere else. We're seeing money come back to you. And we're seeing a Girdwood Arts and Cultural Center, which is a wonderful thing. I'm happy for those folks, but the family in Mountain View that will never go there is paying for that. It all seems problematic to me. That money, that $800 to $1,000, is a lot of money for a family in this neighborhood. What you're doing to try to attract people to this community is potentially significantly harming the people that are already here trying to make it. Thank you.
Does anyone else want to speak? Happy to hear from everyone.
My name is Mary Miner, and I didn't stick my hand up when there was an ask for people who oppose the sales tax. And I do oppose the sales tax for many of the reasons that people give are stated it is regressive. However, when I look around at everybody, I don't think anybody here is named Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. And whether it's special projects or whether it's paying for fire and ambulances and police and water and sewer and these kinds of things, there's limited ways to raise funds for that because I don't have the money to buy my own army or pay to build my own school or send my kids to private school. I don't have any of that. And the only way that communities can do this is if we band together. And taxes are the way that we share that. That said, again, I don't agree with a sales tax, but I do think that we need an income tax. Thank you.
Yeah, you don't have to raise your hand. You can just come on up. Feel free to address that if you need to.
Okay, yeah,
thinking this sales tax is not a good idea because of how it would affect, it would benefit largely the people who have currently have low interest rates. And it would hurt people who are trying to get into it's like the people who it would benefit already have an advantage of the low interest rates. But what I do like about the sales tax is that it would be on Amazon purchases. And it would level the playing field between online purchases and brick and mortar local businesses. So that is the one thing I really do like about the sales tax, and I think it should be something that would be considered, is how to put taxes on the online sales.
I have 10 questions. So one thing I wanted to know is, will the cost of implementing the tax come out on the portion that's under the tax cap or above the tax cap? And how much is that expected to be? Other question, the midtown housing piece. It sounds like that's going to happen regardless of whether this tax passes or not. I don't know if I understood that wrong. Next question, well, not really a question, but more of a statement. The existing infrastructure piece, 15% of 33%. So you're really only looking at about 5% of the total for existing infrastructure. Next question, the public survey that was done, I'd like to know where we could get a copy of that. That's something that I think people should see. And then finally, I just, kind of more of a statement. I learned in one of the previous meetings that if you statistically average it out, if you have a house that is over $600,000, you will end up getting more back from the tax than you pay. If you have a house that's under $600,000, you're going to end up paying more in the sales tax than you get back. For me, running for assembly for East Anchorage, it seems to me most people in East Anchorage, their houses are worth less than $600,000. And so it seems to me that this especially harms East Anchorage. And so that's just something I kind of wanted to get off my chest. Thanks.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here, assuming I truly appreciate what I saw happen to your face here today. I read your body, and I saw that you did hear the enlightenment, the pain, and the anguish that this community has and has had for a good long time. And I hope that you and those powers to be do hear. That's what a hearing is supposed to be, rather than a check off that we did it. People had 3 minutes. These 3 minutes, people, you did well. Keep standing up. Keep raising your hand. Thanks for the signs. God bless us all.
Hear, hear.
Hi, I'm Robert Moore, 58-year resident of Midtown Anchorage. Let's go back to some other taxes that have been imposed on us. Like the cigarette tax, almost 20 years ago, it was earmarked for preventing children from smoking. Where's that money going? Into the general fund. Let's go to the alcohol tax. Let's go to the cannabis tax. Let's go to the
road tax or the gasoline tax. All these preemptive taxes aren't being used for what they're to be used for. Is this just another tax to expanding bureaucracy? How are we going to afford this tax? Who is going to monitor and implement this tax? To me, it seems like a really bad idea at the wrong time. Thank you.
I wasn't going to say anything here. My name's Dave Cabot. I've been in Alaska since 1974. I worked in Mountain View for 20-something years. I lived at 424 North Cleven Street. So, you know, I've been in the area. I am for this, and so I wanted to look at you guys in case you throw anything at me. I can duck in time. I was one of the people that went to Oklahoma City to see why it worked. Something was going on there. And I went there, and that's when I learned about how, you know, they already had a sales tax. It might be 6% or something along that line, maybe 7%. And then they had 1% that went to the MAPS projects, which I didn't really understand what that was, but I went there, and what had happened is Oklahoma City had tried to get, they were declining. Things were going downhill. So they wanted to get United Airlines, I believe it was, to build a facility there to do maintenance on jets because it's the center of the country and that kind of thing. And they won that award, and then the people from United sent out the people from their maintenance and the hangars and this kind of stuff that's going to be relocated there. And the people went to that town, came back to United and said, if you move us there, we're all quitting. It's a dead town. It's no good. And it was not a good town. That gave the people who lived there an inspiration to say, we got to do something for ourselves. Nobody else is going to do it, we're going to do it. And they came up with this idea, pretty unique, of putting 1% additional tax that would then go into projects to revitalize the town. And the first one, they barely got that through. And then like 6 years later, they did a second one. That one got through just a little bit better. Then they did a third one. That one got through better yet. And the last one's gone through, and it's got like 60-something% approval rating because the people there did take it and build the projects. And the projects that they built are all varied ones, a lot like we have here. They're varied and that kind of thing. But when I was in Oklahoma City, if I went in a taxi cab, I asked the taxi cab driver. If I went to the Walmart, I asked the cashier, what do you think about this MAPS project and that kind of thing? They didn't know what that was. I said, well, you know, the 1% that you guys paid to build the river walk, the sports facility, the better trails, the parks, and this kind of thing. And every one of them said to me, oh yeah, that's us. We've done that. We've made this town a lot better. I grew up thinking I was going to leave this town, and now I want to stay. So somebody's got to reinvest in ourselves. And we don't know. We haven't come up with any other way than following theirs. They had a sales tax. They added the 1%. We didn't have a sales tax. So that's where kind of that thinking goes. And if you have any questions for me, I'll be sitting over here, and as long as you don't beat me up.
They didn't redistribute the wealth. They didn't have the 2% property tax reduction.
So
That is true. They just added the 1% for the maps.
That's right.
For that, I agree.
So yeah, thanks. Your time is up, and definitely.
Sorry.
So if anyone wants to talk with this gentleman, feel free to do that. Anyone else? Yeah, don't feel shy. Come on up.
Hi, I'm Adrian Valentine. I'm from Northeast up here, a little off my face. I'm against this and kind of a little for it because I see the mountain bike trails and I ride the coastal trail a lot, and there's a lot of maintenance that needs to be done on the paved areas and stuff. But I've also seen, like, since I moved here 6 years ago, a consistency in, I guess, like, keeping up our parks, especially Davis Park, what's going on in that issue can't be resolved, we can have a little more public safety and get the homeless somewhere where they're a little safer too. I just don't have a lot of confidence that this money is gonna be used to our liking. These projects just seem kind of like vanity, sort of, is what it feels like. I think we need to fix things that are already an issue and have been an issue for decades versus building new stuff that we don't really need. We have a great trail system, we have great parks, we just, and I don't think alcohol should be exempt either. It causes by far the most issues, like in Anchorage, they're terrible. So that's all I got.
My name is Rose, and I always have a suggestion. At meetings, I come up with suggestions. So, what about tapping the oil companies and that have been to me, they've been basically tax-free. I think, that's my understanding. So if we tax the oil companies, then maybe we can use some of that tax payments that they pay to the state of Alaska rather than residents of Mountain View and other parts of the city try to come up with a sales tax to improve amenities. That's my suggestion. The other half of my little 2 minutes left is to make a statement about Davis Park. Is growing and it seems to be getting more dangerous. And I'd like the city to tap the powers that be at Fort J. Bear and help us get this the Davis Park cleaned up. And my third suggestion is I noticed that there's those school lights that blink yellow during a certain time of the morning when the kids are going to school. People go zooming past faster than 20 miles per hour. And I don't see any policemen, pulling over speedsters, not being careful of the school kids going to school. But I do see the cops descending upon Mountain View on weekends and using it as a training ground for their new hires. So where are the cops not pulling over drivers who are not being careful of the kids going to school? Thank you.
Anyone else? All right. Great. Well, get back on the mic. Okay, great. Thanks everyone for that. That was very helpful. And I think, as Kyle stated, very enlightening. I always appreciate being enlightened. Okay, so I'm going to do my best, my level best, to address as many of the issues brought up as possible. I'm just going to go back to the beginning. All right, so there was a question asked about how we are going to support projects in the long run. And so the way that the proposal works is it sets up a trust fund for operations and maintenance. And that operations and maintenance fund is capitalized through the $60 million and will go towards supporting long-term these projects. Very different from the Project 80s, which they did not envision having capitalized O&M fund. So this was definitely something that most Assembly members said we need to fix that if we're going to do another version of Project 80s. So that is in the ordinance. I think also maybe in the ballot proposition itself. So with regard to the leeway and the ability that the Assembly has to change any specific 1%, 2%, 50-50, whatever it may be in the end. So the language in the ballot proposition is fairly strict. It does talk about how 2% of the net proceeds, or net receipts rather, collected will go towards reductions in the overall collection of property taxes. So it's going to be, if approved, in section 14.03 of the charter, which is essentially our local constitution. So the Assembly and the municipality, which in the end the administration will be the ones administering that, will follow what is in the charter.
The Assembly can change the charter.
So there was a comment made that the Assembly can change the charter. The only ones who have the ability to change the charter is you. The voters are the only ones who have the ability to change the charter, which is why this proposal needs to go to the voters in the first place, as it does look at changing the charter. Also, the charter says any sales tax needs to go to the voters, so there you go. With regard to the temporary nature, the way that it is written is that, again, in the charter, that this will be temporary, it'll have a beginning date and an end date, and if the voters don't reapprove a sales tax, then it will end. And if it does end, the administration has already been playing around with scenarios of what it looks like if it does end. Getting to a question that was asked earlier around staffing and costing. So one of the documents that if folks are interested in getting into the nitty-gritty, which I feel like some folks in here are very interested in getting into the nitty-gritty, I would suggest that you read the C, which I'm not sure if the C was printed. I think it was just the ordinance itself. So the C is a summary of economic effects, and you can find a copy of the C on the Assembly website. And essentially what that does is it lays out in specific terms and in broad terms what this will cost public sector, what it will cost private sector, and so public sector cost will be, in terms of FTEs, we're looking at sort of day one, if the voters were to approve Project Anchorage, day one would be 4 full-time FTEs needed to begin the implementation, and then that would ramp up over the span of a few years to 28 full-time positions to administer a sales tax. And then if the sales tax were to end, were to not be reapproved, whatever, pick a scenario, then it would be 8 total FTEs would be needed to do basically the wrap-up of the sales tax for a year or 2, to do the final audits and to close everything out. So that is the FTE positions. In terms of the actual dollar amounts here, essentially we're looking at roughly, I think it says in here, $7 million to administer annually. That's mainly staff. It was 6, and then the administration did some reconfiguring, and then it went up to 7. And essentially where that is coming from, that was another question asked. So that is coming equally from both sides of the sales tax. So it's proportionate across the base of the tax. It's not coming disproportionately from one or the other side. if, and this is likely to happen, but if the Assembly does approve one of the amendments to do 50-50, it would already naturally be split between those two, 1.5% and 1.5%. Yeah, so I appreciate the idea being put out there that, or the argument that this is somehow a tax on people experiencing homelessness. Certainly the way that it was crafted was not intended to do that. Most of the, so it's already sort of federal law that you can't tax SNAP. So that's something that you can't tax, and by and large, a lot of the population experiencing homelessness doesn't get access to SNAP benefits. Most non-prepared foods, all, I should say, non-prepared foods won't be taxable. There may be certain things where it is taxed, like clothing is taxed, but I think by and large, people experiencing homelessness likely get clothing from nonprofits or other entities. So I appreciate that argument, and we'll mull on it and think over it as we approach the March 18th vote. Yeah, so this idea of shifting wealth. So one of the arguments that a lot of, one of my colleagues makes is around the idea of shifting wealth to out-of-state commercial property owners. And it is a strong argument. It's one where you look at the tax base and roughly the way that pie chart plays out, 40% of our property taxes come from owner-occupied homes, and then the rest of our property taxes come from commercial property owners, some of which live in Alaska, some of which don't live in Alaska, and rental properties. The landlords, some of which live in Alaska, some of which don't live in Alaska. So it's, I appreciate that argument. The UAA Center for Economic Development Analysis, which again, I would encourage folks, if you want to dive deep into this and have that kind of time to read that analysis. That analysis showed that roughly the non-resident owner property amounts to 15.2% of total Anchorage taxable assessed value. So it is a non-insignificant number. It is a sizable number. If you do a comparison between that 15.2% and the total percentage of non-residents, so we're looking at tourists or looking at folks coming in from the valley, from north or south of us, if you look at those numbers, we're roughly talking about 18.2 million going out of state. And there's actually a solution in the works for that, but right now, 18.2 million going out of state. And then if you look at tourists and residents from the north and south, what that total is, approximately you're looking at 25.2 million collected through the sales tax. So overall, it is a net positive, but also here that argument that preferably $0 should be going out of state, and here I understand that is a strong argument. Getting to the solution, there is actually a bill in Juneau by Representative Gray, which if passed and goes through all of that process that Juneau has to go through, will allow local jurisdictions to adjust this, because right now our hands are tied by the state. The state does not allow us to differentiate between different types of property, whether it's commercial, whether it's owner occupied, whether it's long-term rental, short-term rental. None of those distinctions can be made by local jurisdictions. We just have to treat all property the same. Representative Gray's bill will allow us, give us the ability to treat different properties differently. And so I can tell you without any hesitancy that several of my colleagues will jump on that should Representative Gray's bill be approved. My opinion has always been we should not wait for Representative Gray's bill to be approved to move forward with progress. The state, we should lead, and the state, if they can't get their act together, should follow. So that has been my opinion on that matter. With regard to the transaction cap, so the original ordinance had a $1,000 transaction cap. Mainly, we wanted to do something, we, the original sponsors and the original team, wanted to do something that was slightly higher than the transaction caps that exist to the north and south of us, because, I mean, if you look at a map of Alaska and look at jurisdictions that don't have sales taxes, like it's pretty obvious. There's one big jurisdiction that does not have a sales tax, and most other sizable jurisdictions do have a sales tax, especially our immediate neighbors to the north and south of us. So most of their tax caps are set at $500. So the original argument was, okay, let's do just a little bit more than that. Let's do $1,000 so that we don't detract folks from staying and purchasing, making their big purchases here rather than going somewhere else and getting taxed less. There was a lot of arguments made by some of my colleagues that we should bump that up even more, that $1,000 isn't enough, and that we should bump that up to a much larger number. I think in the end what we, Randy and I as the sponsor, have settled on is $2,500, which is significantly more than the $500 cap that our neighbors to the north and south have, but we don't think it's large enough that it will detract folks who are looking at making big purchases not make them here, which is not something we want to do. We don't want to hurt our local businesses when we set up this tax. And again, in the end, this is all going to be open to amendment and further discussion. Maybe some of my colleagues want to raise that even more. With regard to the gas tax, so specifically to the gas tax, we looked at sort of national averages on the gas tax, and we're at pretty close to national averages on the gas tax. We didn't want to go too much higher on that. Certainly the state could go higher on their gas tax. I think they have quite a bit of leeway, but on the local level, we're pretty standard. And also, people have to drive to get to work in this city. It's just a reality that I wish wasn't the case, and certainly one could look at my record and see that I have been a strong advocate of public transit and doing what we can to expand public transit. And would love for a version 2 of Project Anchorage to focus on public transit, but that's not what we have right now. Okay, so on capital versus existing services. So why doesn't Project Anchorage fund municipal services? And the long and short of that is there are prior versions of sales taxes have all focused on expanding general government for existing services. And none of those prior sales taxes have been approved by the voters. In fact, they've all have died by pretty significant amounts. There is some amount of support from the general voters, going back to this idea that there has been a variety of public opinion surveys put out there by the Project Anchorage Anchorage team, the coalition. There is some general amount of support of some specific things, one of those being housing. There was actually a surprising amount of support for investing in housing, which is why that proposal is amended in such a way that it does put more emphasis on housing. But there is generally not as much support as is needed to get something passed by the voters, which in the end, that's, so like it or not, is what I am looking for, is something that will get approved by the voters. I should get off my soapbox on this, but I was one of the authors of the alcohol tax. And the alcohol tax was very similarly framed, where it was very much, we looked at what the voters would approve or not approve. We crafted the alcohol tax in a way that would get maximum voter approval. We put it out there and it got approved. This is very much following a similar process. We looked at what the voters are interested in, what they're not interested in. We crafted it in a way that would get maximum voter approval, and we're hoping to put it out there. But in the end, the Assembly, at least the way that this is being done through the Assembly process and not the voter initiative process, the Assembly is sort of the guardian of whether it gets on the ballot or not. So the process on household exemption, it's an interesting one. The UAACED's analysis looked at two different ways. They did sort of an initial analysis. I would love them to dig in and do a more detailed analysis, but they looked at two different ways. An exemption, which would, people have put out there, it may require some kind of exemption card, not unlike what folks use for SNAP, EBT, or doing some type of credit system. And the UAA-CED analysis actually, I think, preferred the credit system model, and they think that model might be a little bit easier to implement. But long story short, the proposal does not dictate one way or another how this will be implemented. It saves that question for round two, which is when you put a tax together, you build the frame of the tax, you build all the pieces that you want to be included in the tax, and then you send it to the voters. And the voters will either tell you yay or nay based off of all the pieces that you put together. And then after the tax has possibly been approved, then after that, the ongoing work happens to finish building up that frame. So that's what I call round two for folks who have been following me when I talk about these things. So round one is what you have in your hand. Round two would happen after possible voter approval. And so it's in round two where we would look at, okay, exemption, credits, is there a third option? What does it look like? But it is going to be in the charter that this exemption will exist and that we will move forward with this exemption. So there won't be any debate from the Assembly on if the exemption exists. It's just going to be debate on how the exemption will look and be implemented. So how will the MAPS Oversight Board work? So it's going to basically work like any other boards and commissions, which I would encourage, I really appreciated a lot of the testimony in this room. I would encourage everyone here to look at our boards and commissions, and if you're interested, apply for one of our boards and commissions. It's on the mayor's website. So the way our boards and commissions works is it's an appointment by the mayor, and then it's approval by the Assembly. So you submit your application, the mayor will approve you, or the mayor will submit you or not to the Assembly, and the Assembly will approve you or not. Some boards and commissions in municipal code, we have discrete seats, so it could be one seat from each Assembly district to ensure geographic equity. It could, as long as it fits within the bounds of local, state, federal law, we can craft the seats any way which we think makes sense. What is the total dollars to implement? I think I talked about that already. It's the $7 million implementation cost, which will be spread across the board.
That's annually?
So yeah, well, because it's 28. Yeah, 28. So is that annual? It was the question, and the answer is yes. It is. It's 28 full-time equivalent staff. That's quite a lot of staff, and that's essentially what most of those dollars are going to go towards. It's labor. So there was a question on taxing of food. So the way that the ordinance works is it differentiates between non-prepared foods and prepared foods. So non-prepared foods are most of the things that you would buy at the grocery store, non-prepared foods. Prepared foods are things that you would buy at a fast food restaurant, at any kind of restaurant, at the deli, in a grocery store. So the tax does differentiate between the two. One of them being exempt, the other one not being exempt. And by and large, the reason that we decided not to exempt prepared foods is that we really wanted to capture as much as possible visitors. And as much as I would like to craft a tax that says visitors must bear the disproportionate share of it, state law, there was actually a court case that says, no, you can't do that. You can't differentiate between, just like you can't differentiate between different types of households, you can't differentiate between different types of individuals in terms of residency. So that is something that case law prevents us from doing. So that's why the tax is crafted in a way to try to get as much as we can from tourists and other visitors. So specific to the special election, that was something that in January, when we had this before us, it was the January 7th meeting, there was a resolution that was brought forward by Assembly members Zalatel and Brawley. And that resolution basically said, the Assembly isn't ready to vote on this right now, needs a few more months. We think we'll be ready to vote on it sometime in the spring, but not right now. And because that means we're going to pass the January deadline to get something on the April ballot, then that means that this question should be put on a special election ballot. And so that resolution was in the end approved by a majority of the Assembly, in large part because there were several Assembly members who said, if you don't pass this resolution, then this conversation is dead. And so I really wanted it to get on the April ballot, but I am also a realist. I've been doing this job for too long. I can count numbers, and on the Assembly, the number that you need to, there's two numbers that you need to always be paying attention to. That's 7 and that's 8. 7 is the simple majority rule to get most things passed. 8 is the number that you need to pay attention to if you want to get something put on the ballot that changes the charter. And so for this, we need to get 8 votes to put it on the charter. So too many of my colleagues said they wouldn't support it if they felt the pressure to vote on it right now, and so that particular resolution got approved. I would have loved for it to be on the April ballot, but that's not the reality that we have before us. So combined with that particular resolution that said August 1 to November 30th, that's how we came up with September 2nd. Yeah, so on the, I'm gonna try and hope that I can make this thing work and not go crazy on me. I'm gonna try to pull up a chart that was in the CED analysis. And oh, of course I don't have that. And that chart basically lays out each decile from 0 to 10 to 90 to 100, and the impact it would have on each decile. So I'm going to try to pull it up so you can, I think, get a visual understanding of what Randy and I were trying to do with the household exemption and why it's crafted the way that it is. So apologies while I go to the correct pages to pull stuff up. This one. I think they both have it. I just double check. Can you all see that? Okay. So there were two CE analyses that were done. There was one done at the beginning, so before any of the proposals came out, and then there was one that was done recently. It came out like a couple weeks ago, closer to 3 weeks ago now, on the most recent final version that's put out. So this analysis has, there you go, this is the chart that I wanted to show you. So this analysis shows that it shows each decile, and it shows the impact. And when we were looking at it, we saw that the bottom sort of 2 to 3 deciles had a disproportionate share, but particularly that bottom decile had a very disproportionate share. And then the rest of the deciles were sort of even, sort of a little bit of a trending line, slightly down, but comparatively even, at least compared to the bottom 2 deciles. So what we tried to do with the household exemption was to look at flattening that so that those bottom 2 deciles, we would provide them with an exemption, and then the rest of that curve, that regressivity curve, is relatively flat. So that was the rationale behind that household exemption and the way that we were thinking about it. So yeah, on the amendment process, I totally appreciate the argument that the amendment process feels rushed or unfair. It is a simple part of the legislative process. Whenever you get elected to any legislative body, that any member has the right and authority to bring forward an amendment at the 11th hour, right before we vote. And sometimes that pisses a lot of people off when that happens, but it is a enumerated right of any legislative member. So what I am trying to do is respect that right, give people as much time as they need to craft their amendments, but also try to give the public some amount of time so that they can review amendments before we potentially vote on them. So I understand and respect that argument that it feels like an unfair process, but it is simply the process that we have. And I appreciate the arguments against it. So I'm just skimming through. See if there's any new stuff. So there was a question asked around whether the Midtown, possible Midtown project was tied to this particular proposal or not. And the answer is no. So should this not get on the ballot, that other potential very exciting housing proposal, the National Archives site, number 3 on this list, will still move forward. And there's an RFP that's in development that's going to move forward regardless of whether this gets on the ballot or not. It's just this will, I think, provide the possible public investments to really try to get more affordable, below market rate housing. I think without public investments and direct public investments, the amount of affordable or below market rate housing might be more limited. On the public opinion survey, so that public opinion survey was paid for by the Project Anchorage Coalition. So if there's anyone that's interested in receiving that public opinion survey, you would have to ask them. I am not the owner of it. I cannot give that public opinion survey data to anyone.
Have you seen it?
I have seen that public opinion survey data. Yeah.
And have you seen the methods that they use to gather the questions and the questions they ask?
I have, yeah. So the public opinion survey was put forward by a very credible pollster, and based off of my pretty extensive experience looking at polls, I would say that this survey was done very well. And I can't share results of what the survey had. I would encourage folks, if you want to look at the results, to reach out to Project Anchorage. I think their website is projectanchorage.com, and you can reach out to them there. Or if you want to reach out to AEDC, who is the spearhead of that coalition, I would reach out to them directly. So there was, I think, someone who said that why is alcohol not being taxed? And so we had strong public participation from members of the alcohol industry who said that their argumentation was that alcohol should not be double taxed. As the only sponsor of the alcohol tax that's left on the body, I think that's that argument falls flat on its face. I want to use more colorful language, but I won't. So I fought long and hard to make sure that alcohol and marijuana were kept on the sales tax proposal. Unfortunately, again, have to go back to that. What is the number that I'm looking at? The number is 8. Too many of my colleagues didn't want alcohol to be taxed. And so it was either going to get removed from this proposal one way or another. Either we were going to remove it in this final version, or a majority of my colleagues were going to remove it via amendment. It's unfortunate, and it's why Section 7 is crafted the way that it is, which is really to say, we're going to give you a break now. I'm going to hold my nose, give you a break now, and in 7 or odd years, or whenever this might get back on the ballot and possibly get approved, you will be taxed. And that's why Section 7 is crafted and the way that it is. And I've heard from some members of the alcohol industry that they're still not happy with Section 7, but I told them that we've offered you a fig leaf, now you need to just let this battle go. And hopefully they will follow that advice. On what about tapping oil companies? And then there was another, prior to that, what about an income tax? Just speaking generally, local jurisdictions, if we're going to gather large amounts of revenue, and I'm talking about 50 million plus, large amounts of revenue, the only levers that we really have to pull to get large amounts of revenue are regressive tax levers. Most people don't talk about this, but by its nature, property taxes themselves are a regressive form of taxation. They're just generally not as regressive as sales taxes that are blanket sales taxes, but they are a regressive form of taxation. Sales tax is the other large lever that local jurisdictions have, and those are, blanket sales taxes are regressive, and we do what we can to reduce regressivity. The income tax is really the domain of the state. And oil taxes is also the domain of the state. As much as I would love for us to be able to wrestle into those areas, the state says income tax is ours. Local governments, you play around with sales taxes, and that's yours. Which is why so many different jurisdictions already have sales taxes. And I'm happy to, I don't directly represent this neighborhood, but I feel like I do represent everyone to a degree. I'm happy to take the issues, your issues around Davis Park and morning police presence to the appropriate folks to see if they can make some headway on those. Okay, I think that's pretty much wraps up what I hope to say. So I think everyone probably got copies of the feedback form. For folks who are like a little bit more tech savvy stuff, here's a, if you want to scan it, feel free to scan that, and it should take you to the feedback form, so you can just do it on your phone. I want to thank everyone for attending today. This has been really helpful for me, and I really do appreciate all the feedback. Let me just make sure there's nothing else I was supposed to say. I do want to just highlight for folks, feel free to take any of the documents from the back, especially the document talking about the public hearing. I want to encourage, if you want to participate either via email, phone, or in person, to do that between now and the 18th. And thanks everyone so much for your time.
Thank you.